She was worth $703 billion. Her husband didn't know. His mother didn't know. His mistress didn't know. And for 3 years, 3 quiet, careful, patient years, Claire Harmon let them believe she was nobody. No family, no money, no name worth carrying. She drove a used Honda. She worked a desk job. She wore a plain silver bracelet and said nothing when her mother-in-law laughed at her at dinner parties. She said nothing because her grandfather, the man who built one of the largest private dynasties in American history, had told her one thing before he died. Let them show you their whole hand first, then move. So she watched. She waited. She got pregnant. And she watched her husband, Derek Whitfield, take his mistress Nicole Reeves to restaurants while she ate alone. She watched her mother-in-law, Sandra, make plans for her erasure like she was furniture to be reupholstered. She watched them build a future that didn't include her. And then, in a delivery room, with a doctor she'd known since birth, a nurse who was already wearing a wire, and a legal team on the 14th floor that had been ready for 6 weeks, Claire Harmon did the thing none of them saw coming. She died. For exactly 45 minutes. She let Derek sit in that waiting room and receive the news. She let him drop his shoulders in relief. She let Sandra walk into that private room and stand over the covered shape on the bed and laugh, that low, satisfied, ugly laugh of a woman who had wanted this for 3 years. And then Dr. Marcus Webb walked back into that room, pulled out an envelope, and said 7 words that turned Derek Whitfield's blood to ice water. The woman under that sheet is not dead. That was part 1. This is part 2. And everything that just happened, the divorce, the press conference, the $703 billion revelation, the public humiliation of Derek and Sandra and Nicole. That was just the opening move. Because while Claire was busy exposing her husband, something far older, far darker, and far more dangerous had already been watching, waiting, building, something that had been moving in the shadows since before Claire was born. Something her grandfather spent his entire final decade terrified of. His name is Grant Aldren Harmon. And he is Claire's uncle. And he is the reason this story stops being about a divorce and becomes about survival. Sit down, don't move, because what happens in the next several minutes of this story will make everything in part 1 look like the introduction. 72 hours. That is how long it took for Claire's press conference photo to reach 11 million shares. That is how long it took for the words, $703 billion heiress fakes death to expose cheating husband, to sit at the top of every trending list in 12 countries. That is how long it took for Sandra Whitfield's name to be typed into search engines 2 million times, not because anyone respected her, but because human beings are drawn to a great fall the same way they are drawn to the edge of a cliff. Not to jump, just to see how far down it goes. Sandra had not left her house. She sat in her kitchen still, rigid, as though if she did not move, the world outside might agree to pause, with a sealed legal envelope on the table in front of her. 200 pages, compiled by James Caldwell's firm. Every cruel thing she had said about Claire across 3 years, organized by date, annotated, documented. The cover bore a single handwritten note in Claire's precise, unhurried penmanship. You laughed at my body, Sandra. I want you to know I heard it. See. Sandra had read that note 17 times. It did not get easier on the 17th reading. Her phone rang constantly. She did not answer. Not her friends, if they could still be called that, now that 3 of them had already texted to say they'd seen the news with that particular energy of people who are delighted by your disaster while pretending to be concerned. Not her pastor. Not her sister in Charlotte, who had always said, with that infuriating gentleness, that Sandra's sharpness would come back to her someday. Not Derek. Derek had stopped calling after the 2nd day. She sat, she stared. The kitchen clock above the refrigerator counted seconds she could not use. Then, on the morning of the 3rd day, A number she did not recognize lit up her screen. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something she would not be able to explain this later, not to herself, not to anyone, made her answer. The voice was male, calm in the way that calibrated things are calm, not warm, not cold, precise. The voice of a man who had said difficult things to frighten people before and found it unremarkable. Sandra Whitfield. Not a question, a confirmation. Yes, she said carefully. My name isn't important right now. What's important is that I know exactly what's in the envelope on your kitchen table, and I know something about your daughter-in-law that Claire Harmon does not know I know. I am in a position to help you, or I can simply watch what happens to you when Caldwell's office files their motion next week. Your choice. You have about 10 seconds to decide which you'd prefer. Sandra's hand tightened on the phone until her knuckles paled. Who are you? She said. A pause, brief, measured. Someone who was supposed to inherit everything she has, the voice said, and someone who intends to get it back. The line went dead. Sandra sat for a long, long time. Then she opened a new contact entry in her phone. She typed no name. She saved the number under a single word that she would later, in a federal courtroom, claim she could not explain. She saved it as helper. The audience does not yet know who made that call. But here is what you need to understand, and understand clearly, before this story goes any further. The man on that phone did not call Sandra because he needed her. Sandra Whitfield, stripped of her son's marriage and her social standing and her comfortable cruelty, was worth almost nothing to him strategically. He called her because he needed a door left open inside the story, a loose thread, something that, when pulled at the right moment, would unravel something close to Claire. He was very good at finding loose threads. He had been doing it for 22 years. Derek Whitfield moved out of the apartment on a Wednesday morning. 2 bags, a boxed suit collection, a coffee maker he'd bought himself 3 years ago as a birthday gift, which now felt, in the specific misery of the moment, like the saddest object he had ever owned. His attorney, Philip Gast, a decent enough man for ordinary work, catastrophically outclassed for this, had sat across from Derek 48 hours after the hospital and delivered the summary with the practiced gentleness of a doctor explaining a terminal diagnosis. The post-nuptial agreement is airtight, Derek. Caldwell's firm drafted it. I reviewed it at the time, and the language is, it's exceptional, precise in a way that leaves no angle. You have no claim to any Harmon asset. The boy's trust is sealed and irrevocable. The divorce is already processing. There is, functionally, nothing to contest. Contest it anyway, Derek said. Gast looked at him. On what grounds? Deception, 3 years of it. She hid who she was. She didn't disclose her net worth. That's not legal deception. That's privacy. Courts protect it. Gast folded his hands on the table. Derek, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Did you know at any point during the marriage that she was connected to the Harmon family? No. Did you read the post-nuptial document before you signed it? The silence that followed lasted slightly too long. I thought it was a beneficiary form, Derek said. Gast closed his folder. Then we have nothing, he said quietly. I'm sorry. But here is the thing about Derek Whitfield that the audience needs to understand now, not as an excuse, but as a fact, because this story is too layered to allow simple villains any longer. The Whitfield family fortune was gone, had been gone for 4 years. The old money, the Greenwich address, the club memberships maintained on credit, all of it was a performance. A very convincing one, but a performance nonetheless. 4 years ago, the Whitfield family's primary investment holdings, commercial real estate across 3 states, the thing the family had built its entire identity around, had collapsed inside 14 months. Not from the market, not from mismanagement, not from bad luck. from a hostile, coordinated, invisible campaign run through a shell company called Aldren Capital LLC, registered in Delaware, operating from an address that listed no public principals. Aldren Capital had targeted 6 Whitfield properties. It purchased surrounding lots through intermediaries, applied political pressure to zoning commissions, introduced competing development projects that strangled the Whitfields' cash flow from every direction simultaneously. When the family was desperate enough, when they were bleeding from every angle and couldn't identify the source, Aldren made lowball acquisition offers through layers of brokers. The Whitfields sold 3 properties at 60 cents on the dollar before they understood what was happening. By then it was done. Derek's father had told him 2 years ago over a bourbon he nursed for 3 hours that they were surviving on the reputation alone. The name, the address, the posture. Derek had told no one. He had married Claire partly, and this is the part that will sit uncomfortably, because he believed her quiet self-containment signaled old connections, dormant family money, a network he could lean on eventually without having to explain why he needed it. He had been mistaken in this assumption in the most spectacular possible way. But here is what Derek did not know as he carried his boxes to a furnished short-term rental. He had not just been a bad husband. He had been a piece on a board, moved into position by a player he had never seen for a purpose he had never understood. Aldren Capital had not destroyed his family by accident. And the reason why they had done it, the specific logic, the long-game purpose, would not become clear to Derek for several more days. It would become clear in the most violent possible way. He was unpacking his second bag when he found the USB drive. Small, black, unremarkable, sitting at the very back of the desk drawer, almost behind the drawer's wooden back panel, as though someone had placed it there deliberately, not to hide it, but to ensure it would only be found by someone looking closely. He almost threw it away. It could have been anything. An old drive from years ago, music files, documents he'd forgotten. He plugged it in. One folder. One file. A financial document. Dense. Long. Corporate language dense as concrete. He read slowly, scrolling, looking for something recognizable in the maze of transaction records and entity names. He found it on page 4. Whitfield Properties Group, his family's company, listed as the target entity in a series of transactions. And on the opposite side of every transaction, the acquiring entity, the one that had systematically destroyed his family's holdings one property at a time. Aldren Capital LLC. Derek stared at the screen. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. Nicole. He looked at her name, rejected the call. He looked back at the screen. He did not yet know what Aldren Capital was, who ran it, or why his family had been chosen. He did not know who had placed that drive in his desk, or when, or why it had waited there for him to find it at precisely this moment. But he felt something shift, somewhere deep in the architecture of everything. He thought he understood about his own life, like a building settling in a way that means its foundation was never what you thought it was. Nicole Reeves was not a woman who panicked. She had constructed her entire adult life on the scaffolding of composure, the right expression at the right moment, the right words delivered at exactly the right temperature, the ability to read a room and perform whatever that room required. Panic was for women who hadn't planned well enough. Nicole had always planned. But she had not planned for Derek to vanish. She had not planned to be 9 weeks pregnant, sitting in her apartment at 2 a.m. with a second positive test in her hand. The contact she'd spent 2 years carefully cultivating now, rejecting her calls with the same reflexive efficiency he'd once reserved for his wife. The irony sat on her chest like a stone. She mapped her options with the cold, systematic clarity she applied to financial models. Derek was broke, unemployed, and publicly exposed, Child support from him would yield a number that was, at best, symbolic. Option 1 closed. She could walk away entirely. She was 31. She had a career, or had had one before the press coverage made her name recognizable in ways that made Tuesday morning staff meetings complicated. She had survived harder things than this. Option 2 was survivable. Option 3, contact Claire. She dismissed it at midnight. She came back to it at 1 a.m. Dismissed it again. Returned at 2 a.m., sitting on the bathroom floor, test in hand, with the specific clarity that only arrives at 2 a.m. on a bathroom floor. The kind of clarity that cuts through every pretense because there is nothing left to pretend for. She picked up her phone, spent 45 minutes finding the secure contact number. It required 3 intermediate searches and a connection to the Harmon Group's communications office that she should not have been able to access. She didn't know yet why she had been able to access it. She would understand later. She wrote 4 sentences, read them 6 times, sent them before she could revise them into something safer. I know I have no right to contact you. I know what I did. I'm not asking for forgiveness. But there's something you need to know, not about Derek, not about us, something else. Something I was paid to do that I didn't fully understand at the time. I need to tell you in person. She set the phone down, waited. The reply came in 40 seconds. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. On the 14th floor of the same hospital where she had pretended to die 6 days ago, Claire read Nicole's message, set her phone down, and looked at her son for a long, quiet moment. Then she called James Caldwell. James, Nicole Reeves is coming in tomorrow. I need the room recorded and I need you present. Caldwell was quiet for 2 seconds. What did she say? That she was paid to do something she didn't understand. The silence on the other end was different this time. Longer. The kind of silence that comes not from processing, but from the deliberate management of information. The specific quiet of a man deciding how much to release and in what order. Claire, Caldwell said, and something in his voice, some quality she had never heard in 30 years of knowing him, in all the conversations they'd had at her grandfather's bedside, in every legal briefing across every difficult year. Something in his voice was carefully controlled in a way that told her it was covering something that was not controlled at all. There's something I've been sitting on for 72 hours that I need to tell you in person, not on the phone. Tell me now, James. I can't, not on this line. A beat. Why not? Because I don't know who's listening. The audience needs to sit with that for a moment. James Caldwell, 30 years of Harmon Group service, the man who held the sealed envelope, the man who filed the divorce at 6:04 a.m., the man who coordinated every element of the delivery room operation with the precision of someone who had been planning this alongside Claire for months. That man, just now, said he did not know who was listening on a secure line. Which means that someone, somewhere, had gotten close enough to the innermost circle of the Harmon operation that James Caldwell did not trust the infrastructure he himself had built. Something was already inside the walls. Now stop. Before Grant Aldren Harmon steps fully into the light of this story, you need to understand something. Because if you go into the next section thinking about him the way you thought about Derek, as a vain, selfish, ordinary kind of man failing upward on charm and good bone structure, you will not be prepared for what comes. Grant is not Derek. Derek was a mediocre man who made bad choices. Grant is something else entirely. He is 61 years old, 6'3". He has his father's eyes, the same gray-green that Elias Harmon carried and Claire inherited, set into a face that has been weathered not by age but by 22 years of operating in environments where weakness is not just penalized, it is consumed. He has not been photographed publicly in 9 years. He does not attend events. He does not give interviews. He does not appear on any corporate registry under his own name. He holds no public-facing board seats, no charitable foundation directorships, no honorary titles at universities. He exists, as far as the visible world is concerned, almost not at all. But Aldren Capital, the shadow corporation he has been constructing since Elias Harmon removed him from the family and the dynasty in 2003, controls $41 billion in private assets across 7 countries. It is funded through a network of shell companies, sovereign wealth intermediaries, and a constellation of relationships with individuals whose names do not appear in newspapers, because newspapers that have printed their names have, historically, found reasons to retract those stories before publication. Grant Harmon was disinherited in 2003. The official story, the one entered into the corporate record, the one the board was given, was financial misconduct, embezzlement, an attempted hostile takeover of the parent company. All of that was true. What the official story did not include was the other thing. The thing Elias had discovered in a private forensic audit 3 months before the disinheritance. The audit he had ordered not because of the embezzlement, but because of a question a private investigator had brought him about a plane crash in the Rocky Mountains that had killed his son and daughter-in-law. Claire's parents. Elias had commissioned that audit in silence, received the results in silence, wept over them apparently for an entire night, according to the only person who knew, which was Caldwell, who had been present. And then, the next morning, Elias Harmon had done something that would define the final 22 years of his life. He had not gone to the police. He had not gone to the press. He had not confronted Grant. He had done 3 things. He had disinherited Grant completely and moved to have him removed from every Harmon entity. He had compiled the forensic audit results, sealed them in a manila envelope, and handed them to James Caldwell with the instruction: open this only if Grant directly threatens the company or its heir. And he had built a wall around Claire, quiet, total, invisible, made not of money or guards, but of carefully designed obscurity. The ordinary life, the ordinary apartment, the ordinary job, the rule about never disclosing her identity. The wall was not meant to protect Claire forever. It was meant to protect her long enough to find someone trustworthy, long enough to bring that person into the family and secure the line, long enough for Grant to remain uncertain about Claire's exact position, her exact readiness, her exact capabilities, because Grant would not move until he was certain he could win. Elias had understood this about his son. Certainty was Grant's condition for action. Remove his certainty and he waits. For 22 years, Grant had waited. And then Claire stood in front of those cameras in that ivory blazer, with Elias' eyes and Elias' composure, and $703 billion behind her name, and the last element of uncertainty dissolved. Grant picked up his phone. He made 4 calls in 20 minutes. The first call was to Sandra Whitfield. The second call was to a man named Harrison Price, a member of the Harmon Group Board of Directors, 6-year veteran, trusted by every executive in the building, on Grant's private payroll for 4 of those 6 years. Price had been placed on the board through a series of nomination maneuvers so incremental and so elegant that no one, including Caldwell, had ever identified the thread. The third call went to a person referred to in Grant's operational records not by name, but by a designation: the mechanic, the specific kind of professional who exists in the narrow, lightless corridor between legal pressure and lethal action. Someone who does not ask why. Someone who does not leave paperwork. Someone who, over 17 years, had made 3 problems for 3 different clients disappear with a precision that had never once attracted a formal investigation. The fourth call was to Nicole Reeves. Read that again. The fourth call was to Nicole Reeves. Nicole had not found the secure contact number for the Harmon Group Communications office through 3 intermediate searches, and her own resourcefulness. She had found it because Grant Aldren Harmon had given it to her. Her message to Claire, the 4 sentences written at 2 a.m. on a bathroom floor, the ones that sounded like confession and conscience, had been scripted. Not word for word. Grant was too sophisticated for that. But the shape of it, the strategy of it, the vulnerable woman, the secret, the request for a private meeting, that architecture was his. Nicole was not coming to Claire's suite the next morning with a confession. She was coming with a wire. The recording was to be used as the foundation of a legal filing arguing that Claire was psychologically unstable, legally reckless, and unfit to lead the Harmon Group, or retain sole custody of her son. Grant's attorneys had already drafted the motion. They needed only the audio. One meeting, one recording, one thread pulled. And everything Claire had built in 6 days would begin to unravel. That was the plan. But here is the thing about Claire Harmon that Grant Aldren Harmon, with all his resources and all his network and all his 22 years of preparation, had consistently failed to correctly account for. She was Elias Harmon's granddaughter. And Elias Harmon had not raised a woman who walked into rooms without knowing exactly what was waiting inside them. James Caldwell arrived at the 14th floor suite at 7 a.m., 3 hours before the Nicole meeting. He was carrying his leather briefcase, the same one Claire had seen across conference tables and hospital bedsides and the sitting room of Elias Greenwich estate for as long as she could remember. He set it on the table and did not open it immediately. He looked older than he had 6 days ago. Not the ordinary older of accumulated years, the specific, sudden older of a man carrying something that had been weightless for 22 years and had abruptly become very, very heavy. Claire was already seated. She was feeding her son. She looked up when Caldwell came in but said nothing until he had settled into the chair across from her and placed his hands on the closed briefcase with the stillness of a man organizing himself. "How long have you known about Grant?" she asked. Caldwell looked up. The fact that she already knew the name, that she had arrived at it without him, perhaps through Webb, perhaps through her own research in the 72 hours since the press conference, moved across his face as an expression caught between relief and a deepening dread. "Your grandfather told me about Grant in 2003, Caldwell said. "When he made the decision to disinherit him, he gave me an envelope that same week, sealed with legal wax, dated and witnessed. Instructions were specific. Open it only if Grant directly and actively threatened either the company or you." And Grant had not until this week made a direct move. The previous legal attempts to challenge Elias' competency were run through intermediaries. Nothing with Grant's name attached. Nothing that triggered the condition. Caldwell paused. "I held the envelope. For 22 years. "Yes." "Open it, James." He looked at her. "Claire, I need to tell you what's in it first, because what your grandfather documented, what he sealed in that envelope in 2003, it isn't just corporate misconduct. It isn't just embezzlement. What he found in that audit." "Open it." Caldwell reached into the briefcase. The envelope was manila old now, its edges softened by 2 decades in careful storage. The legal wax seal was intact. The date, October 14, 2003, was written in Elias Harmon's handwriting, which Claire recognized the way you recognize a voice from childhood, not consciously, just instantly. Caldwell broke the seal. He read for 90 seconds. In 90 seconds, the color left his face so completely that Claire set her son down in the carrier beside her and leaned forward slightly. "James." Caldwell set the pages on the table, pushed them toward her with both hands slowly, the way you handle something still warm. Claire read. The room held itself very still. What Elias Harmon had sealed in that envelope in 2003 was a forensic audit report commissioned from a private investigative firm based out of Washington, D.C., 47 pages. Technical language throughout, but the conclusion stated with unusual clarity at the end of the final section. The plane crash that killed Robert and Diane Harmon, Claire's father and mother, on a Tuesday in October, 22 years ago, was attributed at the time to a hydraulic system failure in the aircraft's primary control line. The NTSB had investigated and ruled it mechanical failure. The airline had settled quietly. The case was closed. The forensic audit told a different story. A specific maintenance contractor, employed by the airline for 2 years before the crash and terminated 4 months after it, had been retained through a labor intermediary. That intermediary was owned by a holding company. That holding company had been capitalized by a seed investment of $400,000. The seed investment had come from a personal account belonging to Grant Aldren Harmon. The maintenance contractor had never been contacted by the NTSB. His employment records had been altered. His name appeared nowhere in the public investigation file. Elias had found him, had documented everything, had sealed it all in a manila envelope and handed it to the man he trusted most in the world, and had spent the remaining 22 years of his life building a wall around the daughter of the son he could not save. Claire set the last page down. She looked at the table for a long time. Her hands rested on the surface, completely flat, completely still. That particular stillness that anyone who had been watching this story closely had learned to recognize, not as peace, not as shock, but as the specific, controlled stillness of a woman choosing what she does next with the same deliberateness that other people reserve for the most important decision of their life. "My grandfather knew," she said, not a question. "Yes," Caldwell said. "He knew for 22 years, and he said nothing. He chose protection over prosecution. He believed, and he told me this directly, more than once, that if he moved against Grant legally, Grant would find a way to expose the attempt and use it to claim victimhood and challenge the estate. He believed the safest version of the future was one in which Grant never got a clean target. He believed that if you were obscured long enough, Grant would eventually make a mistake." "He was right about the mistake," Claire said quietly. "He underestimated how long it would take." She stood, walked to the window, looked at the city below. "How many people know about this document, James?" "You, me, and Grant, who knows that Elias conducted an audit and has presumably spent 22 years wondering exactly what it contained. Then he's been operating under the assumption that we have something catastrophic on him." "Yes." "Which means," Claire said, turning back from the window, "everything he's done this week, the forged codicil, the mole on the board, the wire on Nicole, he's not just trying to get the inheritance. He's trying to get there before we open the envelope. Because if we open the envelope and go to the FBI with what's in it, it's not a civil matter anymore," Caldwell said. "No," Claire said, "it's a murder investigation." She looked at him steadily. "Call the FBI, James, not after the Nicole meeting, now this morning. Claire. And tell Marcus Webb to take his daughter somewhere safe today. Don't tell me where, tell no one where, and tell them both to stay there until I say otherwise." "What makes you think Webb is?" Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was a message from the head of her security detail, forwarding a report from the team monitoring known Aldren Capital communications. "Activity spike overnight. Signal consistent with third-party deployment. Target profile matches witness classification. Physician. Secondary targets, medical staff, delivery room personnel." She showed Caldwell the screen. He read it, set the phone down, said nothing for a moment. "Then I'll call Webb first." Dr. Marcus Webb received the photograph on a Tuesday morning. It appeared in his personal email, not his hospital account, his personal one which he had held for less than 14 months and shared with fewer than 20 people. The message had no text, no subject line, just an image attachment. He opened it. His daughter, Emma Webb, 23 years old, second year of her graduate program in environmental science at Columbia, photographed from a distance, 50 feet, maybe more, standing outside her campus building, holding a coffee cup in one hand and laughing at something on her phone. Her hair was back. She was wearing the green jacket she'd had since undergrad. She had no idea the photograph existed. Webb sat at his desk for 3 full minutes without moving. Emma did not know the specifics of what her father had participated in 6 days ago at the hospital. She knew he had a connection to the Harmon family, had known since childhood that certain phone calls made her father's voice go quiet and careful in a way that most calls didn't. She did not know about the delivery room, the sheet, the sealed court order, the 4 cameras. She did not know she was a target. Webb picked up his phone and called Claire. "Someone's watching Emma." His voice was steady with the specific steadiness of a man who has chosen, in real time, not to allow himself the full weight of what he is feeling. "I received a photograph of her this morning, taken today, my personal email. I don't know how they found it." Claire closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "Don't go home tonight," she said. "Take Emma somewhere, a hotel, her aunt's place, anywhere that isn't her apartment or yours. Tell her it's a precaution. Tell her whatever you need to tell her to get her moving without frightening her. But move her today. Send me the location through the secure channel only. 2 people from my team will be with you within the hour." Claire. "Marcus." "I've known Grant Aldren Harmon for 30 years, Webb said, and now the steadiness held something beneath it, a current, old and deep. The voice of a man who had sat in Elias Harmon's study and listened to things being said about Grant across decades. "Your grandfather spent every one of those years making sure Grant could never get close to you. I knew this day was coming the minute the will was read. I hoped I was wrong." "You weren't wrong," Claire said, "but you are protected. That's the only thing that matters right now." A pause. "Your grandfather loved you more than any person I have ever watched love another," Webb said. "Whatever happens, know that everything he built for this, for you standing in exactly this moment." Claire said nothing for a moment. "Then thank you, Marcus. Move Emma today." She hung up, set the phone down, picked up her son. Held him. Said nothing. Nicole arrived at 9:58. She had dressed carefully, navy blazer, composed face, the body language of a woman packaging herself as credible, as someone who has earned the right to be heard. She had rehearsed her opening. Grant's instructions had been specific in structure if not in word. Get into the room, establish rapport, get Claire talking about the legal challenge, about the will, about Caldwell's strategy. Wear the wire. Let Claire fill the silence. The recording would be edited by Grant's legal team and submitted as evidence of recklessness, of instability, of a young woman in over her head playing at running a company she had no right to lead. It was a thin operation. Grant knew it was thin. But he had built empires on thin operations before. Nicole walked into the suite. Claire was at the head of the table. Caldwell sat to her left. 2 individuals in dark suits sat at the far end, still, expressionless, the kind of professional presence that is itself a message. Nicole's step faltered slightly. She steadied, sat down. "You're wearing a recording device," Claire said. The words arrived with no preamble, no warmth, no hostility, delivered in the same tone Claire had used to order coffee across 3 years of a marriage Nicole had helped to destroy. "It's in the inside pocket of your blazer, left side. The transmitter is a small black disc, approximately the size of a coat button. Please remove it and place it on the table." Nicole's composure fractured. Not completely, she was too trained for complete collapse, but a crack ran through it, visible, real. Grant Aldren Harmon called you on Friday at 6:18 p.m., Claire said, her voice unchanged. The call lasted 11 minutes and 43 seconds. He told you that if you produced usable audio from this meeting, he would pay your outstanding medical debt, cover the costs of the pregnancy, and provide a lump sum payment of $400,000. He also communicated that if you declined to cooperate, he had the operational capability to make your employment history and certain personal financial records appear significantly different from their actual state. The room was completely still. How Nicole started. Because Grant has operated on the same communication infrastructure for 9 years, and our technical team identified his signal architecture 48 hours ago. Claire leaned forward slightly. Nicole, I want to say something to you that I need you to hear clearly, because in approximately 30 seconds you are going to have to make a decision, and I want you to make it with accurate information. She paused. I'm not your enemy. I never was. You made decisions that caused me pain, real pain. But the person in this story who is using you as a disposable instrument right now, the person who found your medical debt, your pregnancy, your fear, and built a trap out of them and handed you the trigger, that person is Grant. And if you sit in that chair and say nothing useful to me today, he will discard you the way Derek did. Faster, actually, with less ceremony and no hesitation whatsoever. Nicole looked at Claire for a long, full moment. Really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since any of this began, not with calculation, not with jealousy or resentment or the defensive armoring of a woman who has spent years telling herself the story of her own choices in the most flattering available light. Just looked. Then she reached into her blazer, placed the small black disc on the table. He told me he just wanted what was his, Nicole said. Her voice was quieter now, stripped of the performance. He said you were young and the board would eventually move against you because you didn't have the experience, and that it would be better for everyone if the transition happened with dignity rather than. What else did he say? Caldwell asked. Nicole stopped. Something moved across her face, a hesitation that was not about loyalty to Grant, but about the weight of what came next. He said, she began, that if the legal challenge failed, he had other options. He said, she stopped again, pressed on. He said that the infant's existence complicated things but didn't change them, that a child couldn't hold a dynasty, and that the board would understand this eventually. The two individuals at the far end of the table exchanged a look. Caldwell said very quietly, he specifically referenced the child. He said the infant, those were his words. Claire was very still. She stood, walked to the window, looked out for 4 seconds. The audience knows this number now, has learned its significance, knows that 4 seconds of stillness at a window means that a decision has been made that will not be unmade. She turned back. James, she said, call the FBI. Then she looked at Nicole, and what she said next, in a voice so quiet it was almost gentle, was the last thing Nicole expected. Are you and the baby healthy? Nicole blinked. Yes, she said. Good, Claire said, and she meant it. We'll arrange a safe location for you while the investigation is active. You'll need to give a full statement. Everything Grant said, every contact, every instruction, everything. Why are you, Nicole started, stopped, tried again. Why would you help me? Claire looked at her for a long moment. Because you have a child who didn't choose any of this, she said simply, and neither did mine. Stop the story. You just watched Claire Harmon, the woman they laughed at, the woman they dismissed, the woman Sandra stood over and laughed at in a hospital room, extend a hand to the woman who helped destroy her marriage. Not because she's weak. Not because she's naive. But because Claire Harmon plays a game 3 moves deeper than everyone around her, always has, and she just recruited the one person with direct access to Grant's communications. The FBI is being called. The wire is on the table. And Grant Aldren Harmon, sitting in that black SUV 3 blocks away, watching the signal go dead on his transmitter, is about to understand something he should have understood 22 years ago. He is not the only Harmon who inherited Elia's patience. Bell, subscribe right now. We are at 300+ subscribers, and every single person watching this story has the power to push us to 1,000. Hit that subscribe button. Do not wait. Do not say later. Subscribe in the next 10 seconds. We'll still be here when you get back. Speech balloon, drop your location in the comments. Where are you watching from? Lagos, Atlanta, London, Houston, Accra, Toronto, Birmingham, Dubai, Nairobi, New York. Let us see how far this story has traveled. We read every single comment and we want to see you. Loudspeaker, share this with someone right now. One person. Someone who would not believe what just happened in that room. Because what comes next, Grant's next move, Derek's decision, and the thing the doctor said on the phone is the part of this story that will make you forget to breathe. We are going to 1,000 together. Subscribe, comment, share. The story is still running. Grant Aldren Harmon did not panic when the wire went dead at 10:07 a.m. He sat in the back seat of the black SUV and stared at the dead signal on the device in his hand with the expression of a chess player revising a position, not alarmed, not reactive, simply recalibrating, adjusting the weight of pieces. He had not built $41 billion by assuming his first move would succeed. He made 2 calls. The first was to Harrison Price. She burned the wire, Grant said. No greeting, no preamble. I need the board vote accelerated. The motion for asset freeze needs to hit the table before Friday. Do you have the 6 proxies? Price, seated in his corner office on the 32nd floor of the Harmon Group Tower, a man who had walked those halls for 6 years with the careful, steady gait of a person who has learned to carry a secret the way good liars carry secrets. Lightly, unremarkably, as though it weighs nothing, said, I have 4 confirmed. I need 2 more. Get them. Grant, if she's already contacted the FBI. Then you have less time than you thought, Grant said. Which is why we are not having a conversation about difficulty. We are having a conversation about timelines. Get the proxies, Harrison. That is the single thing you are required to do. He ended the call. The second call connected after a longer pause. When it did, there was no greeting from the other end. No name, no confirmation, simply a quality of presence, breathing, awareness, the sound of a person who has learned to communicate in the subtraction of unnecessary things. She burned the Nicole operation, Grant said. I need you to shift to the secondary objective, Dr. Marcus Webb, the OB. A pause. He's a federal witness in an active proceeding now, the voice said. I'm aware of what he is, Grant said. That's why I'm calling you instead of someone else. I don't need him gone. I need him pressured. Enough that he requests a postponement. Enough that he reconsiders the cost of his involvement. Approach method. Personal vulnerability, Grant said. He has a daughter, Columbia, graduate program, she's not protected yet. I can have something on his desk by morning. Do it, Grant said. He set the device down, looked out the tinted window at the city moving past, indifferent and enormous and full of people who would never know this conversation had occurred. He thought about Elia's, about the envelope, about what Caldwell must have found inside it when he finally opened it, about whether Claire, reading it this morning, had understood the full scope of what she was standing in the middle of, or whether she still believed, the way young people with power often believe, that the resources at her disposal were sufficient for the scale of what she was facing. He looked out at the city. Not yet, he thought. She doesn't understand yet. She will. Harrison Price called the emergency board meeting for Thursday at 9 a.m. The stated basis was governance concerns regarding rapid succession of leadership, during an active legal challenge to the estate, language precise enough to be technically defensible and vague enough to be almost anything. He sent the notice at 8 p.m. Wednesday. He confirmed 4 proxy commitments by 10 p.m. He sent follow-up messages to the 2 remaining targets at 11 p.m. By midnight, he had received 2 declinations. He did not sleep well. At 8:55 a.m. Thursday, the boardroom filled. 15 members. The kind of people who have been in rooms like this before, whose faces are trained to reveal nothing until revelation becomes strategically useful. The kind of people who knew Elias Harmon for decades and were now, in the first week of Claire's tenure, quietly assessing the distance between what they had expected and what had walked into the room. Claire arrived at 9:00 a.m. exactly. She sat at the head of the table, looked at Harrison Price with an expression he had been trying to read for 3 days. He had not been able to. He could not now. He called the meeting to order, moved the motion. 2 members seconded. He began counting hands. He counted 4. He looked at the 5th target, Mr. Ash, your proxy. Elliot Ash, 55 years old, former Harmon CFO, 20-year board veteran, a man whose name appeared in the same breath as integrity in every conversation about this company, looked back at Price without expression. I withdrew it this morning, Ash said, 7:42 a.m. Price's jaw tightened. He looked to his left. The 6th proxy was also silent. I'll need to table the motion until. Sit down, Harrison, Claire said. She had not raised her voice. The instruction arrived with the quiet authority of a fact, not a request. Harrison Price sat down. Claire opened the folder in front of her. Her assistants moved in a single, coordinated motion. Distribution so smooth it had clearly been rehearsed multiple times, placing a copy of its contents in front of every board member simultaneously. The boardroom was silent in the way that spaces are silent when people understand, simultaneously, that something irrevocable is about to occur. What you are each holding, Claire said, is a 4-year financial record of payments made from Aldren Capital LLC to an account held under a Delaware-registered shell company called Price Consulting Group, incorporated under Harrison's wife's maiden name, never disclosed to this board, operating as a conduit for compensation in exchange for the exercise of board influence on behalf of Grant Aldren Harmon. Several board members looked at Price. Several looked at their folders. Several looked at Claire. None of them spoke. Over 4 years, Harrison Price received $2.3 million from an entity controlled by my uncle, a man currently contesting my grandfather's will through a forged document, a man who has made threats against a federal witness in an active proceeding, and a man who my legal team has reason to believe bears direct responsibility for the deaths of my parents 22 years ago. The word parents did something to the room, a shift in barometric pressure, the kind of shift that happens when a statement moves a situation from the professional category into something older and more primal. I am moving for the immediate removal of Harrison Price from this board, effective this meeting. I am simultaneously referring the complete financial record to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I am informing this board that the legal challenge to my grandfather's will, the forged codicil grant filed last week, has already been subjected to forensic document analysis by 3 independent laboratories, each of which identified the forgery within 48 hours of examination. Grant's legal challenge will not survive preliminary review. She closed her folder, looked at Price directly, one final time. You can wait for the vote, Harrison, or you can save us both the time. Harrison Price sat for 10 seconds. Then he stood, gathered his papers in the automatic, meaningless way of a man whose hands need something to do when his mind has gone silent, straightened his jacket, walked to the door, opened it, walked out. The door closed with almost no sound. Claire let the room breathe for 4 seconds. "Now," she said, "let's talk about protecting this company." The man arrived at Derek's furnished rental on a Wednesday evening. He was not Grant. Grant did not conduct his own visits, which was itself a statement about the kind of man Grant was, the kind who never places himself in a room where a conversation could go wrong. But the man was unmistakably Grant's. The quality of his suit, the quality of his stillness, the way his eyes completed a full inventory of the room before his body had fully crossed the threshold. He sat down across from Derek, set a folder on the table between them. "Did not open it. Mr. Whitfield, my employer would like to offer you an arrangement." Derek looked at the folder, did not touch it. "Who's your employer?" "Someone with considerably more interest in the Harmon Group than its current CEO anticipated." "A beat. What's in the folder?" "A draft sworn affidavit. It states that during your marriage to Claire Harmon Whitfield, you personally witnessed significant and repeated episodes of psychological instability, emotional volatility, erratic behavior, episodes of dissociation severe enough that you feared for yourself and for the child, that you remained in the marriage out of obligation and concern for the baby's well-being rather than from genuine partnership." The man's voice carried no judgment, no inflection. He might have been reading a lunch order. "It is, of course, entirely fabricated. The drafting is exceptional, constructed from real psychological literature, with very specific language that will hold up to initial legal scrutiny. In combination with the pending will contest and the board governance motion, it creates a comprehensive portrait of a woman unfit to lead a major corporation and potentially unfit to retain sole custody of a minor child." Derek had not moved. "You sign the affidavit and appear in the accompanying proceeding. My employer deposits $10 million in an offshore account before your court date. Your financial situation resolves. You rebuild your life." Silence. Derek looked at the folder. He thought about the USB drive still in the drawer. The name Aldren Capital, 3 properties, his father's voice over bourbon, the specific gravity of a family name that was nothing but a name. "Who is your employer?" he asked again. The man assessed him for a moment. Then, apparently calculating that the information was low risk at this stage, "Grant Harmon." "Harmon," Derek said slowly, "Claire's uncle." "Her estranged uncle, yes." "Whose company," Derek said, "destroyed my family's real estate holdings 4 years ago." The stillness on the other side of the table changed quality. "I'm not aware of any." "Aldren Capital," Derek said, "Whitfield Properties Group, 3 transactions across 14 months. I have the documentation." The man said nothing. He was recalculating. The documents were supposed to have been recovered from the apartment. The drive had been on the retrieval list. "Your employer didn't just want Claire's inheritance," Derek said. His voice had changed. Something in it was flatter now, clearer, stripped of the social performance he'd been running on for years. "He wanted her isolated. He destroyed my family's finances deliberately. He needed me broke enough to be desperate, married to a woman he assumed had no real money but might have connections. And when the marriage eventually collapsed on its own under the weight of my own choices, Claire would have nobody and nothing. Easier to approach, easier to corner, easier to discredit." He pushed the folder back across the table. "He miscalculated her, and now he's here in my apartment asking me to lie about the mother of my child, with $10 million in bribe money because he's out of legitimate options." The man looked at him. "Get out," Derek said, "and tell Grant that if he makes one more move toward my son, I will walk into the FBI field office on Federal Plaza myself and give them everything I have." The man stood. He straightened his jacket, a mirror, eerily, of what Harrison Price had done in the boardroom 2 floors above Claire's suite 3 days earlier. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, very quietly from the doorway, "my employer doesn't respond well to refusals." Derek looked at him steadily. "Neither do I," he said, "not anymore." The door closed. Derek sat alone for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and wrote an email to the FBI field office contact that Claire's security team had, 3 days ago, left under his door as a precaution. A gesture he had interpreted at the time as patronizing, and now understood as exactly what it was. He attached the USB drive contents. He hit send. Then he sat back. He thought about his son, a boy he had not yet held, had not yet seen outside of a hospital window glimpse, who carried his name in the middle and his mother's dynasty in the last, who had entered the world on a Thursday morning while his father sat in a waiting room and held another woman's hand. He thought about what kind of person he was going to be from here. He had one data point so far. It would have to be a start. The board meeting ended at 11:15 a.m. with 17 resolutions passed, each one a structural reinforcement of Claire's authority, a legal sealing of every avenue Grant had been building toward over the past 4 years. Asset protection, governance protocols, an independent forensic audit of the past 6 years of board activity, with particular attention to any external influence on nomination procedures. As the members filed out, exchanging the careful, controlled words of people who have just witnessed something significant and are not yet sure what it means for them individually, Claire stood at the head of the table accepting brief words of acknowledgement, not congratulations, because this was not a victory, it was a defensive maneuver, and everyone in the room was intelligent enough to know the difference. Her head of security, Marcus Thorne, ex-FBI, 15 years with Harmon Group, a man whose professional affect was so consistently neutral he seemed to exist outside the normal range of human-readable expression, waited until the room was empty. He stepped to her side, bent slightly, said something in a voice too low for the room to carry. The audience does not hear it. What the audience sees is Claire's right hand, resting flat on the surface of the conference table, close slowly into a fist. She said one word, "Where?" Thorne said, "Derek's building." Derek was found at 11:02 p.m. A neighbor returning from a late shift, a night shift nurse named Gloria, who would later give a statement with the measured precision of someone accustomed to documenting injury, found him in the 4th-floor stairwell, crumpled against the landing wall, breathing but unresponsive. 2 broken ribs. A severe contusion on the posterior of the skull consistent with a single, deliberate blow from a blunt object delivered from behind. His laptop gone. His phone gone. The USB drive gone. He regained consciousness at 1:07 a.m. in the hospital. He opened his eyes to fluorescent light and the particular quality of institutional quiet that had become, this past week, a familiar ceiling. He turned his head. Claire was in the chair beside the bed. Not his mother, Sandra, had not come, had not been called, had in fact not been reachable since that morning, a detail that would become significant in approximately 12 hours. Not Nicole, not Philip Gast. Claire. She was looking at him with the expression of a woman who has been awake for 19 hours and has decided not to perform any particular emotion at this moment, because she is too tired for performance, and this man no longer requires it from her. "You came," Derek said. His voice was rough, the words slightly imprecise around the consonants. "You refused the affidavit," she said, "and you sent the FBI the drive. You didn't deserve to die for it." He was quiet for a moment. "How did you know about the meeting? What they offered me?" "Your building has been under passive surveillance by my security team since the divorce was filed. Grant's fixer visited 14 separate individuals in the first week. You were on the list. I needed to know what you'd do." He looked at the ceiling for a long moment. I destroyed everything, he said. The words came out flat, devoid of the self-pity that would have made them easier to dismiss. They were simply a statement, an inventory. The marriage, you, what we were, all of it. Yes, Claire said, you did. Is the baby okay? He's fine, he's safe. Claire, he turned his head back toward her. The drive is gone, they took it. We have copies, she said. We've had copies since before the divorce was filed. James has copies. The FBI received the original transmission from you tonight before they went to your apartment. The physical drive was never the critical asset. Derek stared at her. You knew they'd come for it. I knew they'd try. A long silence. The email I sent, he said. The FBI does that. It helps, she said simply. It corroborates. It establishes a timeline of Grant's contact with Aldren Capital's financial operations and their connection to your family's holdings. It matters. He looked at her. Claire, I need to say something, and I need you to know I'm not asking for anything from it. Not forgiveness. Not anything. I just need to say it because I think you deserve to hear it said directly. She waited. You were the best thing in my life, he said, and I treated you like a contingency plan, and I am sorry. Genuinely. Not because of what you are or what you own, because of who you are, which I knew actually. On some level, I always knew. I just chose something smaller because something smaller asked less of me. The room was quiet. Claire looked at him for a long time. She did not offer forgiveness. She did not close the distance. She was not that woman, and this was not that story. But she stayed in the chair. Which was perhaps enough. Get well, she said eventually. Be a decent father. That's the only thing left that matters. She stood, adjusted her bag, walked toward the door. Claire, he said. She stopped. The man Grant sent, before he left, he said something. Something I didn't understand at the time, but I can't stop thinking about. She turned. He said, tell me where the envelope is and this stops tonight. I didn't know what envelope. I told him I didn't know. He said, Derek paused. He said, she'll open it when she's ready. And when she does, tell her to look at the date on the first page again, not the date it was written, the date it was last accessed. Claire stood very still. That's what he said. He said Grant wanted you to know. Someone touched that envelope before Caldwell opened it. Someone in Caldwell's office. And Grant wants to know if you figured out who. The elevator doors opened on the lobby level. Claire walked through them and stopped. She looked at her phone. Unknown number. She stood in the center of the lobby for 3 full seconds. Then she answered. The voice that came through was the voice she had prepared herself for and not been fully prepared for, because you can know intellectually that a thing is going to happen and still feel the specific gravity of it when it does. Low, measured, precise. The voice of a man who has been inside the shadows for so long he has forgotten there was ever anything uncomfortable about the dark. Ms. Harmon. Grant. You've had a productive week. So have you, she said, less successfully. A pause. She could hear behind his voice the ambient sound of a moving vehicle. The man was never still, never in one place long enough to be found. I want you to understand something, he said. The legal challenge, the board vote, the wire, those were opening moves. I have been playing this game for 22 years. You have been playing it for 6 days. I don't expect you to fully appreciate the depth of what you're standing in the middle of. I know you killed my parents, Claire said. Silence. It lasted 3 seconds, which, in a conversation between people of this caliber, was a very long time. You found Elias' envelope, he said. Yes. Then you understand what I'm capable of. Yes. And you're still on the phone with me. I'm still on the phone with you, she said, because I want you to hear me directly, not through a wire, not through a fixer, not through a mole or a forged document or a bribed attorney, from me, personally. Her voice did not change, did not harden, did not rise. It remained at exactly the temperature it had been since the beginning of this call, which was, in its own way, the most frightening thing about it. "I'm not my grandfather. He spent 22 years maintaining a careful distance from you and sealing envelopes and trusting that obscurity was enough. I understand why he did that. I understand the calculus. But I am not going to do the same thing. I am coming for you with the full legal and institutional weight of the Harmon Group, the FBI material you gave me through Derek's drive, the forensic audit from 2003 that is now in federal hands, and every resource I have. I will not pause. I will not negotiate. I will not offer you a quiet exit. You will be held responsible for my parents, not in a boardroom, in a courtroom." A pause. Then Grant said the thing that changed the temperature of everything. The thing that, even now, even with everything she had prepared, Claire had not seen coming. "And you should know," Grant said, "that the private nurse who was with your grandfather on his final shift, the one who sat with him in his last 4 hours, worked for me, has worked for me for 6 years. And what he introduced into your grandfather's IV drip during those final 4 hours was not what was prescribed." The lobby, the floor under her feet, the sounds of the hospital around her, all of it continued, indifferent. "Elias Harmon did not die of cancer, Claire, not from cancer alone. I made sure of that. I made sure of it because I needed the timeline accelerated. I needed the will to execute before he could add further protections for you. I accelerated your inheritance," Grant said, and his voice, for the first time in this conversation, carried something that was not quite emotion but was the ghost of it. "You're welcome." The line went dead. The lobby was still. People moved around her, the ordinary machinery of a hospital at midnight. Claire stood for a long time. She thought about her grandfather's final 4 hours, about the nurse, a face she had registered but not focused on, because when you are sitting at a deathbed your attention is on the person in the bed. About the moment Elias had stopped being able to speak and had simply looked at her with those gray-green eyes, their eyes. She understood now. And what might have been in that look besides love and age and the ordinary passage of a long life? She thought about what it meant that Grant had accelerated the timeline. It meant he had been afraid, not of the will he had already been disinherited, of something in the will that Elias might have added in his final months, a protection, a clause, something that would make Grant's challenge even more difficult. Which meant there was something Elias had been planning to add that he never got to write. She called Caldwell. He answered in 2 rings. "James," she said, "did my grandfather make any amendments to the will in the final 6 months of his life?" A pause. "He drafted one," Caldwell said slowly. "He asked me about it in September. He wanted to add a provenance clause, a specific legal instrument that would require any challenge to the succession to be accompanied by a clean security background on the challenger. It was specifically designed to trigger the sealed audit if Grant ever filed a formal challenge." "Did he sign it?" "No," Caldwell said. "He died before it was finalized. The draft is in my files." "Which means Grant knew about the draft," Claire said. Another pause, longer. "Yes," Caldwell said quietly. "If his man was in the room in those final hours, then yes, he would have known. Then he killed my grandfather to prevent a legal instrument that would have destroyed his challenge before it started," Claire said. "James." "Yes. I need that draft tonight. I'll send it within the hour. And James, the envelope, the date of last access. Someone in your office touched it before you opened it. I need to know who." The silence that followed was the longest of the night. "I'll find out," he said, and his voice, for the first time in 30 years of knowing him, carried something very close to fear. 3 days passed. In those 3 days, the FBI opened a formal investigation into Grant Aldren Harmon, citing the forensic audit, Derek's USB drive, Nicole's statement, the documented threat against Dr. Webb's daughter, and the communication records from Grant's 9-year infrastructure network. A federal judge issued a preliminary injunction freezing Aldren Capital's domestic assets pending investigation. Grant's attorney filed a response challenging the injunction. The response was, by all accounts, excellent work. It would not be enough, but it would take time. Harrison Price retained counsel and requested a cooperation agreement. The SEC declined to offer one. The forged codicil was formally rejected at preliminary hearing. The forensic evidence was, as Caldwell had predicted, overwhelming. The challenge was dismissed. Sandra Whitfield agreed, through her newly retained attorney, to a confidential resolution of the recorded laughter incident in exchange for a public statement of apology. She released the statement on a Thursday afternoon. It was 11 sentences. She wrote every word herself. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, and she did not feel better afterward, and she did not expect to. Nicole Reeves gave her full statement to the FBI over 2 sessions. She was placed in a secure location with security coverage. Claire's team arranged private prenatal care. No strings attached. No leverage. Just a woman who understood something about the particular vulnerability of carrying a child in a world that had not been arranged with your safety in mind. Derek was discharged from the hospital on Friday. He received, through Caldwell's office, a formal notification that Claire was open to a structured co-parenting arrangement to be negotiated at a later date when the criminal proceedings against Grant were further advanced. The notification was 2 pages. Professional, precise. It contained one sentence that was neither professional nor imprecise. Appearing at the bottom of the second page in the same handwriting he recognized from the bracelet, from the note to Sandra, from every quiet, unhurried thing Claire had ever written. He should know his father, be worth knowing, see. Derek read that sentence 4 times. Then he folded the letter and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Close to the same place, a man keeps something he intends to keep. On the morning of the 4th day, Claire left the 14th floor for the first time since the delivery. Not to the Harmon Group Tower. That visit, the first official appearance as CEO, was scheduled for the following Monday. This was earlier, 6:45 a.m. A visit to the Harmon Group's legal archives on the 3rd floor of a building 6 blocks from the hospital, where Caldwell's team had secured the original copies of the estate documents. Simple routine, a 30-minute errand. She walked from the parking garage to the elevator. The structure was quiet in the specific way of very early morning. The few cars present, the overhead lights casting the flat yellow of a space designed for function and nothing else. She was halfway to the elevator when she noticed the light above it was out. She stopped. The protocols Thorne had drilled into her across the past 6 days were not complicated, but they were absolute. 3 lights in this garage were non-negotiable. The elevator light was first on the list. If it was out, you did not proceed. You called the position and you waited. She had not called the position. She had come alone. Thorne was going to be absolutely furious with her, and she had known this when she left and done it anyway. Because she was a woman who had lived her entire adult life making herself smaller and less visible and more careful. And some mornings the weight of that was heavier than the logic of it. She looked left. She looked right. The garage was silent. Then footsteps, from behind the concrete pillar to her right, not hurried, not hesitant, the footsteps of someone who is not rushing because they do not believe they need to. She turned. A figure stepped out of the shadow behind the pillar and into the flat yellow light. And Claire Harmon, who had not flinched in a hospital room, who had not flinched reading the forensic audit of her parents' deaths, who had not flinched when Grant spoke on that phone, Claire Harmon flinched. Because the face that stepped into the light was a face she knew. Not Grant's, not the mechanic's, not a stranger's. A face from this story, from clothes, from inside. A person she had trusted with information, with access, with proximity. A person whose presence in this garage at 6:45 a.m., with this particular deliberateness, this particular approach, was not just a betrayal. It was a devastation. The figure raised one hand. There was something in it. 40 feet behind Claire, the stairwell door burst open. Thorne's voice, "Down, get down," split the silence like something physical. Claire moved. The sound that followed was a single, sharp report, the kind of sound that does not belong in parking garages, in ordinary mornings, in the life of anyone who has not chosen this. And Claire did not choose this. And yet here it is. Here is what Grant Aldren Harmon set in motion 22 years ago when he looked at his own family and decided that possession was worth more than people. Claire hit the ground. The garage echoed once. Then it was quiet again. Part 2 ends. She survived. Barely. The 3 days she spent unconscious in the 14th floor suite, the same floor, the same room, the same bed where her son had been born, gave Grant Aldren Harmon enough room to make 3 moves that no one in her circle anticipated, because they had all been watching the front of the board and Grant had been moving pieces along the back. The person who stepped out of that shadow in the parking garage. Their name will be said in the first 60 seconds of Part 3, and when you hear it, you will go back through every scene in this story and find the moments, the tiny, quiet, almost invisible moments, where it was always there, where you could have seen it, where Elias probably saw it and said nothing, because he was a man who believed in giving people the chance to choose differently. They chose. Derek does something in Part 3 that no one predicted, not the audience, not Claire, certainly not Grant. It will cost him something real, and it will be the first truly unselfish act of his adult life. Nicole's baby arrives in Part 3, and the DNA test that follows, the one run as a standard hospital procedure, will produce a result that lands on Caldwell's desk and causes him to sit down slowly and say, very quietly, to the empty room, "Oh God," because the father on that test is not who anyone in this story assumed it was. And Grant Aldren Harmon, 61 years old, $41 billion, 22 years of patience and darkness, and the specific genius of a man who has never once been held accountable for anything, will make one mistake in Part 3. 1. The kind of mistake that powerful men make when they have gone too long without consequence, when they begin to believe that their intelligence exempts them from the ordinary mathematics of cause and effect. He will underestimate someone who has been in this story since the very first scene, someone quiet, someone the audience stopped watching closely because they seemed, by now, like furniture. Someone who has been recording everything. From the very beginning. Part 3 is not a comeback story. It is not a redemption story. It is not even a revenge story, exactly. It is a reckoning. And when it is done, when the last piece falls and the last door closes and the last document is signed, Grant Aldren Harmon will understand, for the first time in his life, what Elias Harmon understood on the morning he sealed that envelope. Some things cannot be undone. And some women were built, by loss and love and 22 years of careful, quiet preparation to make sure of it. Subscribe, comment your location, share this right now. Part 3 is coming, and it is the one that FINISHES everything.